I see a few more attendees have joined there. So probably good to make a start now. So what I'd like to do is kick off by saying hello and thank you to all of you for joining us this afternoon. To those on the session who don't know Cloud Cover, we are an IT services business and Microsoft Go partner based out of not so sunny Glasgow. Today, on this session today, what we are looking at is hybrid working. Catchy title. It's always necessary for these sessions, so it may be a hybrid world after all. What we're really looking at is hybrid working and importantly looking to share some of the lessons learned, I guess, from us. We've had the pleasure of supporting a large number of organisations in recent months and years with hybrid working, flexible working, remote working, and we're keen to do a session to share some of the lessons learned, the things we've seen work really well, the challenges we've encountered, share them with you all in terms of some key considerations while you're looking at hybrid working within your organisations, hopefully. So on a personal note, I am Owen Smith. I am the sales manager at Cloud Cover, and I am joined today by my colleague David. David, I'll pass to you to say hello and introduce yourself. You'll do a far better job of that than me, I'm sure.
Yeah, hi there. I'm David Pieroni. I'm the head of technology and projects at Cloud Cover. So I'm responsible for both the sort of help desk support side of the business, as well as those greater projects of actually building people those hybrid world solutions, those cloud systems, and getting them up to date.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. Thank you. So over the course of the next 45 minutes, what we're keen to get a look at is really work through these stages. For the first 10 minutes, what we're going to do is look to just on a high level lay the foundations for the conversation. We'll look at what actually is hybrid working and take a bit of a look at the evolution of hybrid working, how we've got to where we are now. What that journey has looked like as I say, at a high level, and David can, of course, provide some insight from a technological perspective as to how that journey has looked as well. We'll then get on to the meat on the bones of today's session, which is looking at the development of an effective hybrid working strategy. And we'll finish for the last, hopefully, 10 minutes. We'll get a chance to open up the floor and look at Q&A. Everyone should have a question and answer portal on the session here. Please feel free to pop questions in there throughout the session. Our colleague Robbie is very capably moderating and looking at that, and he'll be adding those in, and we can look at the questions at the end of the day and do our best to answer those, and anything that we can't answer today, we can go away and look to come back to as part of the follow-up from today's session. So if we kick off by looking at what is hybrid working, very broadly, I think we can define hybrid working as a working model which effectively facilitates collaboration, productivity, and the ability to achieve objectives regardless of physical location. So both in physical office spaces and out with working remotely from home, external offices, external collaborative working spaces, for example. Obviously, I think it's important that we input a caveat to that in some industries that is far more attainable and simpler than in others. Construction, manufacturing, for example, there are often a requirement for physical presence on construction sites, on manufacturing lines, for example, where hybrid working becomes a more difficult challenge to implement. I think that is very fair to say. If we then move on and take a look at the evolution of hybrid working, really where has this come from? How have we got to where we are now? I would say if we look back and reflect on this, where it's come from, if we go back to probably 2019 and before, the terms frequently used at this time were remote working and flexible working, I would say. And although there was a definite demand for remote or flexible working, it's fair to say that this absolutely wasn't the norm within organisations. And in many cases, it was often a privilege which was reserved for organisational leadership and management. What we certainly seen and what feedback tells us is that staff who often sat out with leadership and management often had to sort of uncomfortably approach the subject of remote or flexible working. They were armed with a rationale as to why this was a good idea, and had to provide or felt they needed to provide reassurances that the output wouldn't be negatively impacted. What we were starting to see, though, I guess, was that growing message and movement that work was something that you do, not somewhere that you go, and facilitating that was starting to. There was a movement which was gathering pace. I think it's fair to say that this was particularly visible in industries which had skill shortages, known skill shortages, or potentially gender inequality challenges, such as the technology industry. And flexible work models were openly being discussed as a very positive contributor towards the equality of opportunity, or increasing equality of opportunity to attain skilled staff. What we then obviously seen last year, in March, the pandemic hit. COVID-19 impacted organisations on a global scale, and those organisations had to implement flexible work models out of necessity. This happened in varying degrees. In many cases, it started with virtual meeting solutions, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, etc., to enable conversations, essential business conversations, to happen when they needed to. For many organisations, this then continued to pick up pace and develop, and cover things like the secure sharing of organisational data remotely, the collaborative working amongst staff remotely, implementation of or looking to implement digital process which replaced manual labour-intensive processes such as maybe timesheets, expenses, annual leave, which potentially had relied on paper documentation and physical actioning in a physical office. And this has been wide-ranging. I guess what it is fair to say is that organisations have evolved at different paces over the last 18 months particularly, but without exemption, evolution has been present across the board, out of necessity, I think it is fair to say. And it has been wide-ranging. What we see are really the ranges of organisations who engage with us, for example. It really does vary in terms of the steps they've taken over the last 18 months plus to enable hybrid working. I guess alongside this rapid evolution of digital adoption, what we then seen was the introduction of this term hybrid working. And I think basically this term has come in and superseded terminology such as flexible working, remote working, which came before it, and it's been the term which has been most commonly used in recent months to adequately capture that rapid evolution of digital technology. And for many, it's a term which reflects the permanent change in how organisations globally will operate moving forward in terms of enabling that work both in physical office spaces and out with. Looking sort of back over this full journey, obviously this is very top level, and I'm speaking in very broad terms, but looking back and reflecting, it's certainly the last sort of two years plus. What I think, I seen a great summarising statement recently in a Forbes article. It was a lady, Donna Venable, who is a VP of HR in one of the large American corporates, and she sort of stated that the world had evolved from one where employees are allowed to work from home to one where they're encouraged to be flexible, and I thought that was a really good summarising statement on how things have evolved at pace in business and organisations across the board in recent times. At this stage, David, I'm keen to engage you. I'll be kind and say you've had your finger on this pulse for a little while longer than me, and been involved in the industry just a slight bit longer.
Yeah, so basically, from my long-term perspective of 3 decades, I've been working in IT all my life, but certainly since 1990, we've been looking at the various things that have been building up. I think it's fair to say to this journey towards hybrid working. I think one of the interesting things that we're seeing and that we're saying is that, yeah, definitely in the early days when the internet first kind of started, you would have that kind of privileged ideal of remote working, where it would be the CEO or the leadership team with their Blackberries, which were expensive and required servers at the time. But I would say that the technical journey that we've been having towards hybrid working, the drive towards getting efficiencies and getting economic savings from these various technologies has always been working in the background. It's something that, when you do have 3 decades to draw on and you look back at, you can realize that this journey has always been there. I think the sort of explosion of the internet was one of those things that actually helped drive it forward a little. We started to see Salesforce, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft sort of unbundling these services from the traditional coffin that was the box in the corner of the office that went beep. They were trying to get applications away, applications and services away from servers and out of offices, whether that's a wide area network so that people could work in different offices in different places, which is arguably remote working, though not really, to actually getting people to then unbundle. And I think once the internet and web browsers started becoming a real thing and applications could be presented in a web browser, the almost natural progression is, well, why not? Why don't we have this from anywhere? That sort of dream and ideal of working from the beach in Malibu is something that people are always trying to get to. So I think that's right in what you say, Owen, and the technical journey's always been there. I think the direction was correct, but what we're seeing now is that drive was there and was always present, but that big red dot of COVID that you have in the middle of your presentation is what caused that explosion in terms of actual hybrid working. As you say, it's that necessity to protect people and to protect businesses that caused the sort of great change that we're seeing just now. And that in itself is something that you can quite easily see from, if you look at Microsoft's Teams, for example. They had a roadmap that was going to be released. They were quite confident that this product is going to be great and was going to fulfill a niche and fulfill a need. And the very fact of the matter is, when COVID happened, that the rapid expansion of Teams in the initial months of March actually knocked it off for a few days, because this is just that kind of explosion of getting the need there. And I think if you look at things like VPNs for internal people, if you look at things like web applications, if you look at the cloud explosion that has happened for all these different applications that you have to use, it's certainly something that not many organizations had in their disaster recovery plan. But I think the sort of initial indications were already there. Scotland, for example, our weather is fantastic, and a couple of years back we suffered from really bad snowstorms, which had that sort of minimal, it's almost like a micro version of the pandemic, where offices were locked down, and those people who I were working with, who had cloud services, who had Office 365, were prepared for that and could quickly adapt, and those who didn't could not. So I think it's interesting to see that the trajectory of where the technical journey is going has always been there, but it's just those drivers to actually force that to be adopted, and obviously that brings its own dangers, which we'll come to.
Absolutely, thank you, David. And I think that's a pertinent point. I know you and I have spoken in the past that the difference between something like, for example, the snowstorms of 2019 and the pandemic of the last 18 months, and how people's thinking around the snowstorm kind of alluded to, this is a temporary fix, which we will resort back to what we did before. for many, whereas this has been very, very different. And as you say, I think we'll get to that, won't we, in the next piece.
Yeah.
So as I say, really the chunky bit of this session was always intended to be this piece here, in terms of organisations looking to further develop or newly develop an effective hybrid working strategy, and looking at the key considerations within that. So no, I know, David, in terms of this piece, cloud adoption, we felt was a good place to start this conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a sort of natural place to start, because really when you're talking about hybrid working, when you're talking about remote working, you're talking about things that are actually built for that. You're talking about things that are scalable, you're talking about things that are flexible. And while there are organizations who have done really quite well for themselves over the pandemic, in terms of reusing and using the VPN capabilities that they have, the routers and the connections that they have connecting to internal offices, I think it's important to realize that even they will have a massive amount of cloud adoption in their organization, even if they don't actually, fully realize it in the strategy. I think it's also important to say that, coming off my last point, is that because this COVID has in fact forced people to adopt these things quite early. Certainly, from our point of view, we're moving quite a few people to the cloud in quite a short space of time, who perhaps weren't expecting it to be as accelerated. And I think the point about that is sometimes in your mind you understand where you're going as an organization and where IT is going, but you've actually not prepared for it. And I think that's important now that we have sort of time to look back and have that effective strategy. So from the point of view of the cloud adoption, well, obviously there's an explosion of services there. So you've got Google, you've got AWS, and from our point of view as a Microsoft Gold partner, we've got Office 365 and the Microsoft stack with Azure, which are putting in an enormous amount of heavy lifting to get people working, to get things sorted out, and to make sure that people have that remote capability that they need. So I think to try and make your own strategy, what you have to understand is both that these options are there, and to try and get a handle on what is your company strategy? What is your company need? What's failing you just now? What is something that you have done that is now a little bit overloaded, and where do you have to look? And I think one of the important things about making this strategy is to have a sort of searching inventory of where you are. I think a lot of companies through the pandemic will have put in some, I think fair to say, short-term fixes. So they'll have shadow IT that's working alongside their normal applications in there that they need to inventory and they need to address. And I think it's that case of actually looking both in the marketplace in the greater IT arena, and trying to figure out where do you fit, what is working for you and what doesn't. And I think it's important, if you don't have that internal resource to do that, that you work with partners and with people you trust who understand your processes, who understand your organization and can help you with that. So I think from that point of view, it's one of those things that everybody talks about, a new normal or getting back to normal. I don't really think, as I say, that this journey has always been happening, and even if please God, the pandemic was to stop tomorrow, I think that journey would continue. So it's something that people have to consider in their greater business strategy. Absolutely,
thank you, David. And I think a great point you alluded to there, David, is just the pace at which organisations had to implement these technologies. I think certainly we've seen a number of great cases of where organisations came together, engaged champions in the business, and made prompt decisions on which technology to move forward with, cloud technology to move forward with.
Absolutely.
I know a very good example we've seen in recent months, certainly, David, is those who radically ramped up their utilisation of Microsoft 365 across Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive and the likes. But what potentially, due to the pace, like you say, potentially engaging a project which would typically be 6 months and maybe 6 weeks, what that then led to were things like, Microsoft Teams popping up and channels popping up here, there, and everywhere, without potentially the strategic process approach to that, or people sharing files without really, for the first time, potentially utilising things like SharePoint, and maybe not having the understanding that they would like to, and the best way to do that.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, and I think it brings us on quite nicely to the next point, which is around security concepts. So, as you say, a lot of people have been doing that rapid progress and trying to figure out where they're going, but also trying to keep things running, to keep the plate spinning. I think as part of your effective hybrid strategy, particularly going forward, is now you need to really have a look and tie down your security concepts. One of the things that I cannot stress enough is there has been a lot of very quick adoption. That's perfectly understandable. There's no fault involved with anyone. It's the situation we were all in. But I think what we have seen is quite the rise in criminality, quite the rise in hacking and phishing emails, and attempts at data breach. In some cases, been quite successful. I think the sort of interesting thing about email phishing, for example, is it's all very well when you get an email purporting to be from Samantha, your CEO, saying, could you put £2,000 in my account? That's fine if you look across the room and there's Samantha there, but the criminals have been exploiting the fact that everyone is remote and everyone's away from each other to really try that social engineering. So I think the security is important. So one of the things I'm going to stress is have a look at what your security plan actually is. Have a look at the access that you grant to your users. Have a look at the logins that they have. Have a look at what's shared externally and what's protected via VPN. Actually, there's absolutely no shame in this to just put a whiteboard up, and just actually write everything down and brainstorm with your leadership and with the people at large, and see where these things are. If you don't have multifunction authentication, MFA, enabled on your cloud services, that's something you really need to look at. And if you don't have a policy in place in your organization about how staff should be reporting security breaches, whether you actually have something that explains to staff what is a correct email and what is a dodgy email. These are things that you should be tying down just now, and actually having a look at in terms of, okay, we might have moved quite rapidly now. We might have left some chinks in our armor and some cracks in the wall. Let's go back and have a look and just confirm that we're as happy as we can be. And I think that's important for any hybrid working strategy, whether it is a sort of longer term or a short term, or whether it's just something that you've had to do due to pandemic.
Yeah, I think that's again a hugely pertinent point, David, and I know you stressed it the first time round, but I think that's again essential that organisations are, if they say they don't have the comfort and knowledge internally to engage, I guess, an external partner who they feel does and can adequately assess the potential vulnerabilities and what they can best do to address those. You mentioned their training, you mentioned MFA, you mentioned a process for reporting breaches, and I think that again leads nicely into our next point. It's almost as if we constructed these points to flow well.
Yeah, it's almost as if we planned things. Yeah, absolutely. I think that the next point is around data invisibility. There has been a lot of movement. There has been a lot of shifting of things, of moving, I guess, virtual tables around, of putting databases out in the cloud, of putting files out in the cloud. I think now is a very, very good time if you haven't adequately had a change log, if you haven't adequately had these things documented, or even if you do, now is that time for that sense check to go back and say, oh, okay, we're looking at our cloud adoption, we're looking at our security concepts, but let's have a look at the data. Let's see where actually are things, yeah? Where is our data hosted now? Where is it housed? What is still internal? What is still external? That's the first key indicator and the key thing to look at. But I think also you then need to look at, well, okay, how are the users accessing that? Where are the users accessing that? And just sense check that again. It might be the situation that you've moved, you know, a big bundle of gigabytes of data up to a OneDrive or a SharePoint area, but that still exists on your local LAN or server infrastructure. You might find that now you've got inefficiencies in your system. Now you've got potential points of concern where people might be working in two documents and sending the wrong thing and doing the other thing. So now's the time to have a look at what have we implemented here, and is it fit for purpose? Did it work? Is there things that we can now take some time and do a sense check? And is there any lessons that we can learn to build on that going forward? Is there anything that we really feel that work quite well? And there will be a lot of success stories. Owen and I see them all the time from companies who have actually broken the mold of their way of thinking and suddenly found, actually, we should have done that ages ago because it's been a lot better for us. And maybe there are other departments or other things that we can actually move. I think also in terms of looking again with security, to look at the data loss protection that you have in place, or the information security that you have applied to your data, will then tie everything up nicely in a good bow. I think also it's one of those things that your disaster recovery and your other documentation will have to change now. So there are a lot of things that you will have to look at in terms of the processes you had in place. It's okay, you know, we used to back up everything in the server and we used to put that out into Azure, into the cloud. But now that the data is actually more disparate and more spread about, are you still doing the same thing? Are you confident that that's actually been working there? So I think that's kind of important to have a sort of relook at where your data is. Can everyone see it? Is everyone singing from the same sheet?
No, absolutely, and I know that you know, you've talked to me on several occasions, David, about tools such as Intune and MDM within Microsoft Estate, certainly, and better methods of having visibility over a state that is no longer in a single physical location, for example, as well. And I think that falls into that same sort of category,
absolutely. That's the thing, is that when you have data in various different places, you might have, you know, users or laptops out there that you've put some data on just to get people working, as you say, Owen, using things like Intune for your mobile device management, getting control of that and understanding what would be the inherent risk if someone was to, you know, leave a laptop on a train, or, you know, a 6-year-old who wanders through your living room and pours the juice on the laptop. What's the inherent risk there?
Absolutely, and that probably, again, our next point here we've put up here, David, is cost and benefit, and I think this is always a consideration. I think what was seen in organisations everywhere last year. You know, some of these solutions are low cost, and by that I mean low financial cost, but can be high time cost, David, and others are high financial cost as well. And I think what is important to consider is that many 18 months ago, even 12 months ago, the landscape was so very uncertain across many industries that, you know, financial investment and time investment were both hugely difficult things to justify, I would say, because do you know I think that often the benefits can be understood and made clear of things like cloud technologies, naturally of security concerns, but it's understanding, I guess, you know, it's that balancing act, David, isn't it, of okay, benefit versus the cost in an uncertain organizational landscape or business landscape, in terms of how long something was going to last, what was it going to look like in 6 months as opposed to now, and all of that. And I think it's been a hugely important consideration, and will continue to be, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think also in terms of the sort of costs and benefits, there's a lot of people, a lot of organizations who have either found that they have things that they are paying for that previously they weren't actually using to their full extent. And I think it's one of those things that actually again, what I talked about earlier, that searching inventory, is that you might find that you actually have services, you actually might have things you're paying for that have been helping you, have suddenly come to your rescue during this time, that you didn't know you had before, or that you had bought as part of a package and never really got to that stage where you were using them as efficiently as you should have been. And I think that's important. It's not just about looking around. Say, for example, you've got a new security hole that you need to patch now with the Azure Active Directory Plan 2. There's another bit of a cost that might suddenly be an impact to your business because of the way things have changed. But by the same token, you might find, for example, that you have space and you have storage that was previously internally on a server area, but that you've already had, a Microsoft or other cloud business that has storage attached to it that you've just never used. So I think in terms of cost and benefit, it's not just of trying to figure out where is the actual value of things that we have A, purchased, or B, the strategy tells us that we need, but also what actually can be brought to the table and where can we bring our focus in terms of being as cost effective as possible. And I think that's important. There are some things that you simply, any organization will simply not scrimp on, and that's quite right. But there are other things that you may find that by the adoption and by the rate of change over the last year and a half, there are things that you could actually, problems you could solve with existing technologies.
That's a great point there, David, and I know you touched on it briefly there, but certainly what we've seen probably most of is the utilisation of SharePoint and how that's increased in recent times. Like you say, that's something that is there, accessible within Microsoft 365 licensing, and like you say, many organisations just weren't utilising it to the full extent, and it's been a saving grace of form for many in recent times. So no, I think that's a great point. I'll pull up the next two points at the same time because I do think that they're inextricably linked, which is user adoption, David, and change management also. I think the one piece that is pertinent here is, as we always say, the time, energy invested in user adoption really makes or breaks, for me, the success of if any implementation of technology, any change of business process. I think how user adoption and change management are approached time and time again, David, I think it's fair to say will make or break. But I guess the caveat, David, I'm keen to put in before I pass the metaphorical mic across to you is that I think for me, humans always struggle with change. I think that's a fair point to say. And what we've experienced in the last 18 months to 2 years is business change is what we're really discussing here, but that's been placed within the wider context of huge change within people's lives. And I think that can't be ignored, and that asking a team to sit on some training to look at a new system which is coming into play in a business without any in a time where there are no or few external pressures is very different to asking someone to do that in the context of social isolation or in terms of having friends or family members that are unwell or poorly, and I think that has been a huge consideration, I would say, David, and how organisations have had to approach this change and say, touch wood, hopefully that is something that we've seen many organisations look to revisit for that very reason, because it's not been approached under normal circumstance. I think it's fair to say, and I use that word normal, better using the word free of pressures or free of external influence, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're entirely right there. The fact of the matter is, everyone has to remember, from the lowest up to the highest, is this is not a normal situation that we are in, and that in and of itself brings a lot of pressure and added to bear. That's why it's very important that factors like that need to be taken into account when you're writing out and when you're planning your strategy. Where we've seen the greatest success over the last 18 months are where people who have decided to be champions of that, who have had the enthusiasm, who've had the willingness and had the desire to actually go and learn things and to bring that thing up, and to, more importantly than that, to bring others along and to help everyone out. And I think it's important to revise the who are not just your leaders in an organization, but who are your thought leaders? Who are the people who bring the enthusiasm? And that could be anybody at any level. You know, there are no such thing as sort of bad ideas when it's presented with, you know, proper enthusiasm and the right level of care and thought. But I think it is important to not just bring people along, but as you say, to understand that we are in a different situation. And I will make no bones about it. Even IT people who've worked in the industry all their lives, like me, we hate change. We also sometimes hate technology. It's just the way it goes. And I think there's that different situation you have now where, in a sense, you're actually intruding the work life and your business into someone's home, in a way that previously, even if this had gone through the same dynamic and the same direction for hybrid adoption was going, you would have volunteers. You know, you would have people who would be interested. You would have people where for childcare arrangements that would work, for you know, holidays, for caring, for all that kind of thing. That would have been great, and that would have been great news. This whole situation has been forced on everyone, and I think it's really using that user adoption and that change management process to bring that out and to understand that, but to bring out the best in your people, yeah, to actually bring them along, to make sure that your training sessions is not just, you know, oh, we're putting in a new technology, it'll be in on Monday and this is how it's going to look, but more around, what do you feel that it needs to be? Does this work for you? Can we put a skeleton together to kick the tires and see what's actually out there? And I think that brings us on sort of quite nicely to the sort of finish off, is that we do have to understand, in terms of both the user adoption and the change management, is that this is a different way of working. And this is sometimes can be quite an intrusive way of working. Yeah. So if you, for example, give someone the all singing, all dancing email system and team system and web application that is pinging them every 5 minutes of every day, you are going to get burnout. You are going to get that human element of, this is work, this is intruding on me, therefore I have to deal with it now. And I think it's important that leaders in the business actually manage that. You can use, you know, a wealth of technologies. If you're on the Microsoft stack, you can use Power BI to actually draw proper graphing and proper information. You can use Teams, you can use quiet times, you can use the other bits of technology that will actually give you a much more complete human picture of what's happening in your information technology organization. And I think that's important not to be dismissed. It's one of those things that you want to set quiet times for people, you want to set switch off for people, you want to maybe do the reporting of, you know, who's still up and working at 12 o'clock at night, and why are they doing so, and is it justified? Because I think sometimes, particularly the way what these things work, is if you don't put caps on them, and if you don't put an understanding of the pressures, and particularly when it comes to mental health and the current pandemic situation, really that onus of responsibility is on you, to put that in your strategy, to make sure people are aware of that, and also just to keep that social aspect that people will be entirely missing by not coming into an office, by not having the conversation in the kitchen or around the water cooler. And I think
I was sorry to jump in, David. I was just going to say that in terms of one of the great things I've seen actually in a couple of organisations now, is they've used Microsoft Teams and these examples, but they've had a Teams channel which is sort of titled something like Coffee Cooler or something to that extent, whereby teams or entire organisations have a space to engage in an informal discussion. That I think many organisations have realised actually. I think there's been many jokes made about that being missed, but I think there's a lot of proof in those comments, because I think many organisations have actually realised the benefit and value that sits behind informal conversations, which do often happen. And in person, when you are sharing a physical location, and I think that again is one of potentially a closing piece, David. We do hear a lot of organisations who really do want a hybrid approach, and many staff who want a hybrid approach whereby they can find a balance of
Yep.
of working between home or remote locations and in physical spaces where they can engage potentially informally. They can be involved in active discussion. Certainly me and I know you and I, David, we talked about looking forward to doing these types of sessions again in person, in the office, for example.
Definitely.
And obviously I won't be able to wear a dress shirt and sports shorts when we do that, but it is that way where there's lots of people looking for that. What I'm keen to do, and now I'm conscious of our time, we've chatted on a bit, I'm keen to move to the Q&A. We've had some good questions come in. If I'll point this one to you, David. Noel has asked here, there's a lot of focus and awareness on cloud security, but very little on cloud backup. A lot of companies have a baseline assumption that companies like Microsoft are too big and professional to lose data. What impact should use of the cloud have on our backup and disaster recovery strategies?
Yeah, that's a good question. I did allude to that a little bit in the data invisibility section, but it's ultimately important to realise that as an organisation, your responsibility for your data and for the backup and disaster recovery of it still ultimately rests with you. There will be agreements with whatever cloud provider you have that, for example, just to cite Microsoft, is that they do have versioning, they do have data centres, hundreds of them across the world that do geo-replication and so forth. But even from their point of view, after about 3 months or so, the data responsibility kind of ends for them and is really up to you. So having things like proper backups, having things like a disaster recovery plan that takes account of the changes that you have made, and just teasing in and understanding with the providers in question, what is your responsibility? What do you do? Where does it end? Where is the weakness? There's a raft of other backup and disaster recovery solutions. Most of our clients use Veeam for Office 365 to give that belts and braces approach to data security. And I think that is important when you're writing your strategy, to make sure you've updated what your policy used to be and what it is now.
Perfect. Thank you, David. I'd see some great commentary in the comment space here. No other kind of in-depth sort of questions at this point. Again, what I'd be keen to do is we'll obviously share post-event communication with everybody. Any questions that come up, or if you're anyone's keen to I guess pick up that conversation with us, please do that. You'll have our contact details within those post-event communications. We'll share the session link, so again, feel free please to extend that to anyone either in your own organisation or elsewhere who you feel would gain benefit, and we'll share information summarising those considerations and some of the examples, I guess, in terms of technology and implementation that David shared there. Conscious of everybody's time, we're just in close to running over the 45 minutes plan, so I would certainly like to say a huge thank you to everybody who joined us today. Really enjoyed delivering this. Hopefully you've all found some value in that. We would really appreciate hearing your feedback on anything you'd like us to share more on, do a future session on, or expand on with some other collateral. So please, let us know what you think. Thank you all again. Hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. See you soon.
Thanks. Bye.